Someone under the age of 30 will be in the final of this Australian Open. I know at the US Open, we just had the same thing with Medvedev, but still, it feels shocking. It feels unprecedented. Speaking of shocking, speaking of unprecedented, Dominic Thiem has now beat Rafa Nadal in a major. It has never happened before. One more little tidbit from the Dominic Thiem-Nadal match that I think is unprecedented and strange. We all know Roger Federer keeps his eye on the ball after contact and then looks up. Something I'd never noticed before but discovered. Take a look at this. Dominic Thiem, when he hits the ball, he closes his eyes. It might work for Dominic Thiem, but tonight when Roger Federer plays Novak Djokovic, I have my fingers crossed that he won't try it. Today, on Coffee Break Tennis, we will take you step by step through the Dominic Thiem match with Rafa Nadal. I predicted that Rafa would win in an epic match. I was right in that we got an epic match. And I was right on one more thing. If Rafa didn't grab the first or second set, he would not win the match. We'll talk about how that happened. Also, Sasha Zverev and Dominic Thiem, a semifinal that no one saw coming. We'll talk about that. And of course, the only other thing left to talk about on today's show, Roger, Djokovic, they will meet, believe it or not, for a 50th time. First up on today's show, let's go right into what was an incredible match. It was kind of like advanced tennis viewing. You got to have a pretty high tennis IQ to fully appreciate all of the maneuvering and crazy stuff that was going on in the Dominic Thiem-Rafa Nadal match. So let's jump right in and talk about some of the keys to the match. As a Federer fan, I can feel for you Rafa fans out there. This is a tough one to swallow for both Nadal, his team, and his fans around the world. Rafa, as Dominic Thiem said, and he was 100% correct, you got to get a little bit lucky to beat Nadal. There were definitely some moments in the match where you had to feel like just bad luck for Rafa Nadal, and a couple key mistakes on his part, and then a couple key things that Dominic Thiem did to get this win. And in some ways, this could be a turning point match, like when Roger Federer just got crushed. You know, he thought he was getting closer at the French Open against Nadal, and then go back to 2008, French Open, Rafa just crushes Federer, and then Federer's confidence a little bit down against Rafa. He loses on his own home court. So that is something we will be talking about later in the year when we go to the French Open, because a win like this for Dominic Thiem, you feel like it could put something in the back of Rafa's mind. So let's start off with, take a look. This is Dominic Thiem adjusting his return position throughout the entire tournament. Now, I was critical at times with Dominic Thiem, talking about, pick something. Are you going to stay all the way back? Are you going to come up and return the serve from closer into the baseline? We saw in the Alex Bolt match where Dominic Thiem was down a couple sets to 1 and had to fight back and win it in 5. We saw in that match a lefty serve just like Rafa Nadal, and a lot of times where Dominic Thiem didn't quite know how to set up to return that serve, especially in the ad court, and it cost him at least, some sets, but ultimately he was able to wear down Alex Bolt and get through that match. Well, take a look. Here is what Dominic Thiem was actually doing. So I just showed you return positions from Dominic Thiem throughout the tournament. Here are return positions throughout the first half of the match. Going into this match, I would have thought this was something that might not be good for Dominic Thiem, and that he would have a hard time figuring out the right mix. But honestly, to me, it kind of went the other way. This kind of hurt Rafa Nadal. Rafa really got a taste of his own medicine throughout this match. And in some ways, I feel like, so you see in that second graphic, Dominic Thiem against Nadal, first or second serve, it didn't matter. He was returning from all over in different positions. But I feel like there were some crucial moments in the match for Rafa, particularly when he had breaks in the first and second set, including serving for the first set. And Dominic Thiem was able to break back, and I feel like some of these key serving out Rafa wasn't quite sure if he should trust the lefty slide with Dominic Thiem, or if he should try to do what Carlos Moya would urge him to do, I'm sure, and flatten that thing up right up the tee, flatten that serve out right up the tee, and catch Dominic looking for the lefty slide backhand, and then it burns him up the tee on his forehand side in the ad court. So there were times where I felt like Rafa didn't know which way to go because Dominic Thiem had been changing up the return position so much and giving Rafa so many different looks. We always talk about you give your opponent different looks with your serve. You mix up your serve. Well, Dominic Thiem mixing up his return position so much, I feel like that actually got into Rafa's head a little bit. So let me show you really quick if you don't understand why this is so important for Rafa. Because, one thing, Rafa's serve, it's not the biggest weapon on tour, yet Rafa has, in the last year especially, posted some of the best win on first, win on second serves we see on the entire tour. And here's the key why. Take a look at this. It's really important for Rafa in this matchup because, believe it or not, Dominic Thiem actually overpowers Rafa with sheer power on the ground strokes, or just miles per hour on the ground strokes. It's so key for Rafa to make his first shot after the serve a forehand. And take a look throughout the tournament, Rafa is doing that so well. I believe the graphic you're looking at shows Rafa getting like 85% forehands after his serve comes back. When he hits a serve and the opponent returns the serve back to Rafa, he finds a way to go on offense right away with the forehand, and he's already in command of the point. That's how things typically go for Rafa Nadal, and that's something we've seen him work with Carlos Moya on in the last year, especially when he plays the better players, the big three type players or top 10 players, next-gen guys like Dominic Thiem who are actually a little bit of a threat for Rafa as they get better and better. So we've seen Rafa work with Carlos Moya on making sure that the first and second serve are even more effective at letting him attack right away. He did this beautifully going to the final last year of the Australian Open without dropping a single set. And now take a look at this graphic. This is why it is so important with Dominic Thiem, especially because, as you can see, Rafa able to dominate in the shorter rallies. These are the rallies where he's able to jump on it and attack Dominic Thiem right away, put Dominic Thiem in a more defensive position. And then you see the longer rallies, the mid-range, and then the much longer rallies, Dominic Thiem able to always find a way to take over and overpower Rafa. He took control of those longer rallies. It was really important for Rafa to avoid that. Now, there's two very different things, and this is part of the credit to Dominic Thiem for doing such a good job of mixing up the return positions and utilizing it effectively in the way he chose to attack the Rafa Nadal serve. Now, take a look at this. This is going to be Dominic Thiem in the ad side. And we saw a lot of this, Dominic Thiem standing in close on the ad side. If Dominic Thiem is in close on the ad side, then if Rafa hits that slider, Dominic Thiem can step in, cut it off before it gets too high for his one-handed backhand, or before it gets away from him and he just can't even make a solid return. And we saw a lot of Dominic Thiem just crushing backhands cross court. And this is a little bit tricky because if Dominic Thiem, it's tricky because if he's in too close, Rafa can go ace up the tee. Rafa could have used a few more of those serves in some key moments. But if Rafa does go with the trusty serve, which Dominic Thiem knows Rafa's going to hit more often, the slider, that's where Rafa hits the serve and it spins away from the left side of Dominic Thiem's backhand in the ad court. If Dominic Thiem hits anything cross court that floats, Rafa can come into the net and finish it. Or even if he gets it back deep enough, Rafa is so good at stepping in and rip the lefty forehand up the line, or he can rip it cross court and really pull Dominic Thiem off the court, then look for a better one to rip up the line and then finish quickly. Rafa was really good at this, and I think it was smart of Dominic Thiem to move in and take that ball early a lot of the time. And then we also saw him move back at times too to kind of make it harder for Rafa to ace him up the tee. So Rafa at times I think wasn't sure what to do, and he went with the trusty slider wide. And we saw some crucial moments in the match where Dominic Thiem was able to just rip the one-handed backhand. Another reason why I said Rafa needed a set early, because as the night got, as they went deeper into the match, deeper into the night, I think they finished almost at midnight, Rafa's ball is not going to bounce up as high, so it's not going to trouble the Dominic Thiem backhand as much. As they went deeper into the match, it was going to be harder for Rafa to go lefty forehand to Dominic Thiem righty backhand matchup, which is his bread and butter when he goes up against one-handed backhand players especially. And also we heard the commentators talk about how Dominic Thiem in practice was seen working on ripping cross-court backhands and practicing with a lefty who had the lefty forehand matchup. Dominic Thiem spent a lot of time. He really followed the game plan well executed it well. And full credit to Dominic Thiem and his team for executing that game plan and drawing up the right game plan. Now, take a look. When Dominic Thiem is returning in deuce, we would see him drop back more because now the lefty slide serve, Rafa can hit it up the tee in the deuce court, sliding away, but you have a straight line there. You don't have as much angle to work with. So Dominic Thiem knows that Rafa's not going to hurt him as much with that serve. Dominic Thiem able to step back and have more time to get into the rally in a more offensive position. So I thought that was pretty smart from Dominic Thiem, and he did a great job mixing up the looks on where he's going to return from. Now, to me, this is the biggest key moment of the match. We just saw yesterday, the day before, Roger Federer had his John McEnroe, answer the question, jerk! He had his McEnroe moment, and Roger Federer said, answer the question to the umpire. What did I say? What did I say? Do you speak Swiss German? What did I say that was bad? Why did I get the warning? And Roger was so mad. And obviously he was dealing with an injury. It was a little different. But still, we saw his play go way down after that exchange with the umpire. Well, Rafa, and we got to say, credit to the umpire. The umpire was pretty lenient. Rafa was letting the shot clock before he hit his serve, the serve clock, he was letting it run down to 0 a lot before the umpire happened to say anything. But with a break in this second serve where it looks like Rafa's going to be able to take control of this match or at least level it, there's a crucial moment where Rafa gets the warning, and I think he took this too harshly. Now, to Rafa's credit, they just had a really long, crucial point in the match and a very exhausting point. Rafa goes up to the umpire and says, why at this moment do you decide to make the call on me? The umpire correctly says, Rafa, I've been pretty lenient with you. I waited a long time to make the call on you. And then Rafa said, you must not like good tennis. So that, to me, that's Rafa's McEnroe moment right there. You don't like good tennis, no? And Rafa's point there is, you don't like good tennis when we have these incredibly long points. You should give us a little more time to catch our breath and go past the shot clock. That's Rafa's thinking there, but a lot of people who especially are sticklers for the rule book are going to argue with Rafa on that point and say, no, it's a shame the rule isn't strictly enforced with players like you, Rafa, and they need to enforce this strictly, and you need to learn to adhere to the rule. You showed a graphic. I don't have it for him, sorry, but I'll just tell you. They showed average time before serves. Dominic Thiem was right at the limit, 25 seconds. And Rafa was averaging 28. So, on average, Rafa was going 3 seconds past the shot clock on every point. That's what they put up on the screen. I want to say, is that average for the whole match? It's hard to believe, but I think it in fact was. Rafa was going over a lot. Let's just suffice it to say Rafa was going over the shot clock a lot. And, of course, the warning was going to come, and it just happened for Rafa to come at a very bad time. And now take a look at this, though, because Rafa, he goes on to hold on that game, but he's obviously so rattled, and we see his level come down, and I think this cost him the second set ultimately. He goes over to the supervisor, and Rafa puts his hand on the guy's shoulder and lets him know that the umpire is out of line. Just like with the Federer match, we saw a massive dip in the level of Rafa Nadal for long enough to let Dominic Thiem get back into that second set. Full credit to Rafa, able to fight back like the great champion he is and get to another tiebreaker. And then they set a stat. I don't know, coming back down from 2 sets to love stats for all the players off the top of my head. I would say Roger Federer probably has the best ever of all time. We've seen him do it so many times. And for Rafa, I'm not sure if they were talking about in recent years or career, but they said some kind of number like down 2 sets to love at majors. Rafa is 0 wins and 14 losses. I don't know what time frame that was, but obviously it was recent enough to be a major factor here. And Rafa couldn't afford to lose that second set, but he did. And he fought back valiantly. And in a moment, I'll tell you where things really went wrong with luck for Rafa in that 4th set. I have a few keys, and these things came up throughout the match. So let me tell you this. Here's my number 1 key. Take a look at this. This is something we've seen Dominic Thiem get better and better at. I want to say, when I was feeling like Dominic Thiem is not going to make it this far to even challenge Rafa, was when I saw the Alex Bolt match, I believe, and you saw a lot of shots like this. See where Dominic Thiem is. Ball's floating. Dominic Thiem flies in. Doesn't volley it. Freaking crushes it with a swinging forehand volley winner. We saw balls like that Dominic Thiem was just completely missing against Alex Bolt. And that made me feel like Dominic Thiem is not in a good enough place to win this tournament or get to the final. Well, clearly, Dominic Thiem has gotten it together, and he is in a... Let's just be real. Dominic Thiem, the reason why I said no one can stop Djokovic in the final if Federer doesn't was because I thought Rafa would get through Dominic Thiem for sure in this match. I thought Rafa would have enough to get through Dominic Thiem, and I thought the conditions would suit him well enough to take an early lead before they got deep into the match and had conditions that were better for Dominic Thiem. Because I was so sure that Rafa would win this match, I didn't think about the matchup of Dominic Thiem and Novak Djokovic in the final. And knowing that on the final, the weather conditions are going to be super slow. We're talking the night matches that Roger had earlier in the tournament where, it just was so slow and it was looking like Roger was really having to muscle the ball and work extra hard. Dominic Thiem in the final in those conditions, super slow conditions, can overpower Djokovic. Djokovic will have a really tough time getting balls past Dominic Thiem if Dominic Thiem plays at this level. So honestly, if you're one of those people out there who wants the records to be saved not because Roger wins another, if you want Roger's record to hold on at 20, well, Dominic Thiem just stopped Nadal from equaling it, and you better believe Dominic Thiem, if he can play like this, he will have a great chance in the conditions of the final to beat Novak Djokovic and stop Djokovic at 16 majors. Now, Dominic Thiem will have to get through Sasha Zverev, and I'll talk about that in a second. Let's go back to this. So here's my key. Dominic Thiem so many times was flying into the net. Balls that maybe in the past Rafa would have had time. He got them deep enough for Dominic Thiem to stand back, way back behind the baseline like you would expect him to do and let it bounce and hit it. Now we're back at a neutral rally. Rafa would have been okay in some pretty key moments in this match. Unfortunately for Rafa, Dominic Thiem has learned how important and how crucial it is, especially against top players. That's why we've seen Dominic start winning a lot more matches against Roger, Rafa, and Novak. Dominic Thiem was so quick to come in and put those balls away, not give Rafa another look. Rally is over. He did it numerous times, and it seemed like it was always a key moment in the match. Another thing that was a key to this match was I've talked about Rafa getting a taste of his own medicine, trying to figure out how to deal with a guy who can be so far back on return at times. So we saw Rafa come to net a lot, which was smart from Rafa. But like what Rafa does to other opponents, you can come to net with good court positioning, and your opponent can be way far back, and you'll typically win those balls. But against Rafa, this is a guy who's so strong physically. He can be way behind the baseline. You can be at the net, and he can rip a ball with so much topspin that when you try to volley a ball that's spinning and flying, it's hard to catch it clean on the strings and hit a clean volley. So we saw Rafa miss a lot of volleys because he got a taste of his own medicine. Dominic Thiem able to rip from anywhere, from the freaking wall. He's able to rip a ball that's too hot to handle for the volley skills. Rafa missed a lot of those. Another thing, kind of bad luck for Rafa, but also the fact that he was getting burned at the net. I'm sure that's a factor in his mind. He let a few balls go over his head that looked like they were going out, that he could have played at the net, and almost, I think, at least 3 times in this match. Again, almost always at a crucial moment in the match where you see momentum swings, Rafa would let it go, and it would drop in. And then finally, and this is where bad luck for Rafa really comes in and where it's going to sting the most for him, the team, and the fans of Rafa around the world, and that is Dominic Thiem getting these lucky net cord bounces. Like Dominic Thiem said, you need a little luck sometimes. McEnroe famously said years and years ago, sometimes you need a little luck to win a tennis match. And Dominic Thiem seemed to, more than once, hit a ball that hit the net, and nothing was worse than this one that set up a match point. Really quick, Rafa able to save 2 match points in that 4th set. And you start to think maybe we're going to see another miracle in Melbourne like what we saw with Roger Federer do already 2 times. And Dominic Thiem has a forehand. He can finish the match. He hits it in the net. So a little bit of luck for Rafa there that Dominic Thiem misses. The next one, this is one of the most badass things I've ever seen in a tennis match. Rafa, and again, Rafa had run out of challenges. He got one more in the tiebreak, but maybe he could have forgot that. It takes nerves of steel to do what Rafa did. You look it up if you don't remember this or if you didn't see it. In the final set tiebreak, down to match point, I think it would be 5-6 for Rafa. Rafa comes to net. Dominic Thiem hits the ball over his head. Rafa gets back very quickly. The ball bounces. Rafa has an overhead, but from behind the baseline, which is, tough to finish overheads, especially down match point from that position. A lot of guys would hit it a little safely, and you might not even be at neutral after that. You might have the guy all over you. Dominic Thiem's case, he could overpower you from that position. And Rafa watches the ball bounce just behind the baseline, Who knows if he's 100% sure that he even has one challenge left, because if he says challenge and he has 0 challenges left, it's game, set, match. It's over. Rafa watches the ball bounce. He watches it. He thinks about hitting the overhead for a second, and then he just stands there with his finger up to challenge. With his final challenge, the camera cuts to Carlos Moya. He literally goes like this. He's hiding his face and his arm. The whole stadium, there's so much tension. And of course, Rafa did have one challenge. The ball was out. 2 match points saved. We go to 6-all, and this is where the most bad luck of all for me. But it's not so much bad luck. It is for Rafa, sure, it's bad luck, but it's also the conditions. And that's why I said it was so important for Rafa to jump out to a 1-set lead or get the second set and make it a set all. And then he could have at least had a 5th set in this case if he would have grabbed one of those 2 sets. At 6-all, Rafa plays a great approach shot, and he's going to come into the net on this, or he does come to the net on this ball. But now take a look at this image that I have here for you. You see Rafa at the net. He's just hit, I think it was an inside-in forehand to the Dominic Thiem backhand. And look where the bounce is. This is perfectly in the strike zone of a one-handed backhand player. This is a spot, a ball at this height, you can really crush a one-handed backhand. I can freaking crush a one-handed backhand at that height. Dominic Thiem is a million times stronger than me. He can do even more with it. If this ball, this same exact ball happens earlier in the match, let's say the first set, the ball jumps a little higher. And as it's higher, it's harder. And you heard McEnroe talking about it a lot throughout the match. He says a high backhand, Dominic Thiem tends to let his elbow get out and up and away, and he doesn't hit it as well. That's why you don't see Dominic Thiem go up the line with the backhand as often. It's easier for him to go cross court. And McEnroe was saying how important it is to keep your elbow closer to your body and down lower, and then swing up to it and get more power from your body on that backhand. Well, earlier in the match, Rafa hits this shot. I think it's too high for Dominic Thiem to rip a clean winner. But here you see it's perfectly in the Dominic Thiem strike zone. He just freaking crushes the one-handed backhand as hard as any backhand you've ever seen Stan Wawrinka hit. And it hits the tape. And if it hadn't, it still would have been a clean winner, I think. So Rafa wasn't going to touch it either way. But you could say bad luck for Rafa, because if the ball's a little higher, if Dominic Thiem doesn't hit it quite as well or as forcefully, then that ball probably doesn't, that goes in the net, right? He misses that shot. But because of the conditions later in the night, that ball sits in the perfect strike zone, despite it being a smart play for Rafa to go for in that crucial moment. It's in the strike zone. He rips the backhand winner, hits the tape. Rafa can't believe it. And I think at that moment, you actually saw Carlos Moya punch whatever's in front of him, a little wall divider in front of him in the player box. He punches part of it. He's so mad because he knows how just, that was just the worst thing that could possibly happen right there. And then finally, down a match point. Again, this looks like you were going to get another miracle, and Rafa's going to save 3 match points here, because take a look at this. Dominic Thiem serves up the tee to the Rafa backhand with match point here, and you can see Rafa hits such a great 2-hand backhand return. It takes Dominic Thiem, it pushes Dominic Thiem back, and it takes him off the court. Look at Dominic Thiem's court positioning. A one-hand backhand from anyone in this position, Rafa's always going to like his chances. And take a look at the shot that Rafa has. This is the Rafa forehand up the line with the player way out of position in their backhand corner. Rafa makes this shot 99 times out of 100, and most of the time it's a winner, or it's a ball where he's coming to net and has an easy put away. You can see in the picture how Dominic Thiem is pretty far out of position, and Rafa has his favorite shot. He can hit a freaking banana here. He loves the banana forehand. He didn't even have to banana it. He just has to hit enough spin on it for margin to go up the line. Maybe it's nerves, bad luck, I don't know. But Rafa puts it again in the top of the net, and it doesn't bounce on Dominic Thiem's side. It bounces on his side. And I'm sure Rafa felt like that was the ultimate bad luck, because when Dominic Thiem had done the same thing, it seemed like it always bounced on Rafa's side. There was a crucial moment earlier in the match, I can't remember, where Dominic Thiem, maybe in the second set tiebreak, Dominic Thiem hits a ball that hits the net, and Rafa has to rush in there and slice the ball down low, and he's in a terrible position to play that point. So there you go. That's what I thought. This is going to sting so much, and like I said, this could have, I know, don't take this as Federer bias. This is not me crossing my fingers that Dominic Thiem stops Rafa at the French Open. This is a fact. If Rafa faces Dominic Thiem at the French Open, you better believe this will be a factor in his mind, and you better believe this will be a major confidence boost for Dominic Thiem next time he faces Rafa on clay. Could be at the French Open. All right, we've gone very long. I saw every now and then I see some comments that complain that all I did was talk about Federer. Well, those guys will be happy because we're not going to talk much about Federer and Djokovic. I'll say one thing really quick. Dominic Thiem is in a great place. Obviously, it's his first time in the semifinal of the Australian Open. But Dominic Thiem has one thing ahead of him that I think is kind of tricky. He's one of the fittest guys on tour. I'm sure he'll be fresh enough to beat Sasha Zverev, but the conditions are going to be the fastest. Tonight for Federer and Djokovic, we're going to see probably the fastest conditions we have seen, definitely in a night match, the entire tournament long, and the humidity is going to be so low. We're literally talking less than half of what Roger has dealt with in all of his night matches. So that's a major positive for Roger Federer. It's going to be even faster, hotter. I think it's going to be like 95 degrees at night on Friday. Chris Fowler, McEnroe, BG, Brad Gilbert, they were talking about how there is a chance it will be so hot they close the roof on Friday. That's a thing that could happen. It's a maybe, but you get the idea. Those will be the fastest conditions. Sasha Zverev will love that because I think he actually has a good chance to beat Dominic Thiem, provided, and remember, Dominic Thiem is going to return a lot better than anyone, Sasha, including, Stan Wawrinka. He's a great player, but he's known almost to a fault. Roger's so good at the chip returns. Well, Stan Wawrinka, he does that more than anyone, more than Roger, to the point where Stan kind of has trouble hitting returns. He pretty much only blocks them, and that made things pretty good for Sasha Zverev in that part of the matchup. Dominic Thiem is going to be a better returner for sure, but in these fast conditions, if Sasha Zverev can serve the way he has been serving, and if he can keep holding serve, he can drag things out in very hot conditions. The guy's lost one set. He spent the least amount of time on court out of everyone at this stage. In the semifinals, Sasha Zverev has a real shot to take advantage of Dominic Thiem, especially if Dominic Thiem is feeling it. This wasn't the first long, draining match that Dominic Thiem has had. But, look, the guy's young and the guy is incredibly fit. So that's a tough call. Last word on that. It's a weird challenge Dominic Thiem has ahead of him because he's going to have to play in the fastest, hottest conditions on Friday with Sasha Zverev. And then he's going to go to some of the slowest conditions he will have seen throughout the entire tournament. I don't know how many night matches Dominic Thiem has played, but I wouldn't be surprised if Sunday and the final, those will be the slowest conditions Dominic Thiem has seen all tournament long. I do like him to overpower Federer or Djokovic in the final because of those conditions, but also it's just a weird change to go from one to the other. I guess Federer or Djokovic will be doing the same thing, but it's a big ask. It's asking a lot from Dominic Thiem. Of course, I've said it and I'll say it one more time. If Dominic Thiem's in that final, even though the conditions are going to be weird for him, it's going to be a lot easier for him to overpower Roger and Djokovic. And Djokovic and Roger are going to have a harder time hitting it past incredible defense that Dominic Thiem brings to the court. All right, a couple comments. Here's one from, let me put this up here. Dennis Daly said, I think if Thiem or Zverev play Joker, they win. They've beaten Novak before, and they have the weapons. And I got to say, I agree because they've done it at the World Tour Finals. They've both had a big win over Djokovic. And this is the same court as the World Tour Finals. It's the same company. They've switched to it this year at the Australian Open. Same company that makes the Basel, Switzerland court that Roger likes so much, and the same company that makes the court at the World Tour Finals, the end of the year tournament ATP Finals. It's the same court, but the conditions will be a lot different too. It's going to be very humid and borderline cold on Sunday night for the final. So it's a weird one, folks. It's going to be very interesting. I don't think I've ever been, well, that's crazy. I say this like every major, but this is exciting stuff, and it's crazy stuff too. I've definitely never seen a major where conditions are changing so drastically day to day, hour to hour. And then here's a comment from Mod Al Ali. Oh, and I'll say one last thing on the last comment from Dennis Daly. I agree with him, but I don't think Zverev will find a way in his very first final. I think Dominic Thiem, he's been to finals of majors, and I think he could beat Roger or Djokovic. I think he's got a good chance if he can get past Zverev in the super fast conditions and deal with the Zverev monster serve in those conditions. Zverev, on the other hand, I think he'll come into it pretty nervous. You saw him choke away an entire set, right? My prediction didn't look very good, but my prediction totally was like double true with this Wawrinka and Zverev match, because I said Wawrinka can run away with this thing if Zverev comes out there and plays terrible. In the first set, we saw exactly that. And then Zverev, credit to him, he's growing up, man. He's maturing right before our very eyes. Zverev pulled it all together and did all the things I thought he could do, and I knew if he did do it, he would beat Wawrinka. Wawrinka looked like he didn't have enough left to dig deep and find a way. So all my predictions seem to come true in that one. Got to pat myself on the back there. All right, this is from Mod Al Ali. Can you do a detailed video on how the effect of weather on tennis balls in general? Well, no, we're not going to do exactly that. A lot of people don't want me to talk about the weather so much, but I will give you a couple. I will tell you the conditions for Roger and Djokovic, and that's pretty much all we're going to say about Roger and Djokovic. And last thing he said, Steffi Graf is the greatest. She had 22 slams at 30 years old. Serena only had 13 at 30 years old. And, of course, Steffi retired after hitting that 22 mark. And I got to say, you got a pretty strong case there. Plus, Steffi Graf, she did play a lot like Roger Federer. So, got to like that. All right, so here's conditions. Rafa and Dominic Thiem at the beginning, like I said, it was key for Rafa to jump out ahead. But I also did, as a slight caveat, I did say Dominic Thiem can win in the fast conditions that Rafa likes. He can do it, and lucky for him, he was able to win in those first two sets. So at the start of the match, we had 84-degree heat at night with 23% humidity. 23% humidity means humidity is not a factor. That's so low, might as well be freaking zero. That's how it started, and that's why I thought Rafa was going to win, because I thought he would take a set or two set to love lead in those conditions. By the end of the match, this is how drastic things changed. They dropped almost 20 degrees. 84 dropped all the way to 66 by the end of the match for Nadal and Thiem, and the humidity almost tripled. 23% went up to 64%. Those conditions got heavy, and you saw how that ball, normally a Rafa ripped forehand topspin monster at somebody's backhand, a one-handed backhand, usually that gets up high enough to give you a little trouble on the passing shot. Whereas in those heavy conditions, that ball stayed down, gave Dominic Thiem a little more time to set up and load up and just freaking crush that. And that cost Rafa the match. Let's compare that to what Roger and Djokovic are looking at. Much faster. They're going to start off with 95-degree heat. That's almost too much. Like, that might almost sap a little bit of Roger energy. But here's why I'm pretty sure Roger will be okay if he's recovered well enough from the groin injury. We're talking 22% humidity at the beginning of Djokovic and Roger. Roger couldn't ask for better conditions. Roger said earlier in the tournament when they asked him, like, do you think the court's very slow? And Roger said, no, I think the courts are the same. I think the weather is making things play slow, and I think it's these balls, is what Roger said. And Roger is damn right. These are the perfect conditions for a Roger upset over Djokovic. No guarantee that's what's going to happen, but Roger couldn't ask for faster conditions. Here's the problem for Roger, but also the good news for Roger. If they go to 10 p.m., so let's say 2.5 hours of play, I think Roger and Joker will go. We still have 83 degrees. And we got 36% humidity. So those conditions are almost the same as what Nadal and Dominic Thiem started with. So Roger's going to have a 2.5 hour window of pretty fast conditions to take a set or a two set to love lead, which I think Roger absolutely will need. I think he'll have energy. I think he will recover well enough to play really well in the beginning. He's going to need at least one set out of the first two, if not both of the first two sets, to pull this off. As it goes later, conditions will slow down and cool off, but we're talking like 11 p.m. If this is a super long epic match, and it very well could be, then things get tougher for Roger, so he doesn't want to be coming back. If Roger's down 2 sets to love, and then he somehow wins the third and the fourth, by the time we're in the fifth set, we're going to have Djokovic and Roger in some slow conditions, and it's going to be really tough for Roger to come through with that. All right, hit the music. That's all I am saying about the Roger and Djokovic match, just because we ran out of time. Real quick, tomorrow I teach my little Munchkin class in the morning, so I will be waking up very early to watch Roger and Djokovic, and I will do a Patron Saint podcast. So if you're not a Patron Saint, you want to support the show, I don't often do this. Usually I make the shows for everyone on YouTube, but this is a case where I can't do a full show. I will not have enough time to watch the match, make a show, and go teach my kids. I got to be there at 11 a.m. to teach these kids, so that's going to be quite a time crunch. If you're a Patron Saint, you will get to hear my podcast right after the conclusion of Roger and Djokovic, or an hour or so after, unless it's like a 5-hour match. Everyone else will have to wait until the next day for the next show. So we won't be back tomorrow, but we will be on the Patron Saint podcast. If you're not a Patron Saint, we would love to have you support this show and keep it going and growing. I basically take off work. This is the only thing I do for teaching tennis during majors. And I'm able to do that because of the Patron Saints. And I thank you very much, Patron Saints. Go to patreon.com/coffeebreaktennis to join the club, and you will get to hear the podcast after the Federer-Djokovic match tomorrow. And all I can say is, may the best man win. And hopefully if Roger's at the net and Djokovic puts something up in the air like Dominic Thiem destroyed it, I don't want to see the swinging forehand volley because the conditions will be fast enough. I just want to see Roger Federer go like this. See ya!